Okay, Ayman, you're recording, right?
Yes, you can start now.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Amira Salema, and I'm excited to be co-moderating this panel with my colleague on the Africa TESOL board, Flavian. I guess he will be in and off because of connectivity issues. But we are glad to welcome you all here tonight. This is the first panel discussion in a series organized by Africa TESOL under the theme of personal, professional, and leadership development. And our discussion tonight focuses on a book that has dealt with that theme. The book is edited by Alan Maley and is entitled Developing Expertise Through Experience and is published by the British Council. I'm going to post a link to that book once we start the discussion. The link as well was announced through Facebook and through the emails that went to the members. So I hope you had time to flip through the chapters and get an idea about this interesting book that we are discussing tonight. In the book, we had 20 practitioners worldwide who were invited to reflect on their own career trajectories in the light of proposed notion of teachers' sense of plausibility. Of the 20 authors, we have the privilege tonight to welcome 6 authors sharing their expertise and experiences with us. These are Alan Maley, Cressa Babalazzaro, Harry Kutsha, Malou Siamirelli, Adrian Underhill, and Claudia Firaraz. We had one more speaker who was planning to be with us tonight, Andrew Wright, but he had an unfortunate accident and we are sorry that he couldn't join us tonight. What we are looking forward to tonight is hearing from you as well. So we have some questions that are ready, but feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A box or in the chat box here. We will have time to try to answer as many of these questions as possible. Also, use the chat box to interact with other participants, introduce yourself, and throw in any thoughts you have about the topics that we are going to discuss tonight. I'm going to stop here because you are not here to listen to me, I guess. I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker, Alan Maley, the editor of this volume. Alan worked for the British Council from 1962 to 1988, serving as English language officer in Yugoslavia, Ghana, Italy, France, and China, and as a regional director in South India. From 1988 to 1983, he was the Director General of the Bell Educational Trust in Cambridge. He then moved to Singapore, where he was Senior Fellow in the Department of English Language and Literature at the National University of Singapore. He was Vice President, then President of IATEFL from 1988 to 1992. In 2014, he co-founded the C Group. This is the Creativity for a Change in Language Education Group. And he was given the British Council's Elton's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2012. Welcome to all of you. The floor is yours, Alan.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. I'm very, suspicious of technology, so I always want to be sure that you can actually hear me. Whether you see me or not is another question. The idea for the book really derives from N.S. Prabhu's idea of the teacher's sense of plausibility. Now, by that, he means that whatever kind of training we get, we do something with it personally. We mediate that training in the light of our own beliefs and our own values and our own experience. So whereas teacher training, seems to be based on the idea that we can prepare teachers for a set of predictable circumstances, what he is arguing and what I am arguing, and others like Adrian, for example, are arguing, is that we need to be prepared for what we cannot be prepared for. In other words, things will happen and we must make of them what we can. We must try and use those unpredictable experiences to make some kind of sense. And the way that we do this, I've suggested, and this is what all of the authors in the book have done, is to look at things like the people that we have met and been influenced by, the places that we've been in, the kind of teaching experiences and life experiences that we've had, perhaps the books we have read, not necessarily specialist books either, and the kind of colleagues that we have worked with. These are all of the kinds of things, and the general context in which we work. And of course, in Africa, Africa is not one place, quite clearly. There are very many different sets of contexts, some of them very difficult, as I remember from my years in Ghana many, many years ago. And we have to somehow make sense of those contexts. So the idea that you can give everybody a kind of one set of things that will suit everything is ridiculous, in fact. So what we have to do is to validate these things in the light of our own experience. And let me just give you a couple of examples. People that I have come across in the course of my life, not necessarily while I was a teacher, but even before that, because I think our own personal experiences of language learning and of language in general are very powerful, especially the early ones. I had a teacher of French, for example, in my secondary school. Nobody in my family had ever learned another language. And that man, through his way of teaching and through his enthusiasm and his support, he opened a window on the world for me. It changed my life. You know, teachers change other people's lives. You should never forget that. Places I've been, well, because we're in Africa, and just let me think about Ghana for a moment. I was in Ghana from 1966 to 1970, 5 years, long time ago, probably before most people were born. It was probably the most formative experience of my whole career. I owe an enormous amount to the school kids in primary schools in rural villages and towns in Ghana. You know, working with those kids was a joy. And yet this was a very resource poor environment. There was not much, you know, even the blackboards were not really functional. You know, there were no windows, there were no desks very often, but they had something else. They had a kind of, you know, a will to learn and a wonderful way of doing it. I remember books that I've read that have had a tremendous effect on me. Books like Teacher, there's a book called Teacher by Sylvia Ashton Warner. Wonderful book about her experiences of how she taught, how she came to terms with difficult circumstances. So, you know, we can learn a lot from other people's written experiences as well. And of course, I've learned an enormous amount from colleagues that I have worked with. I wrote a number of books earlier in my life with a man called Alan Duff. And Alan Duff was like a soul brother to me. You know, we worked together so closely for many years. We produced maybe 10 or 12 books together. And that was just, you know, we were constantly learning from each other. And people like Michael Swan, who I'm still in touch with, we had wonderful learning conversations. And I still have these wonderful learning conversations with Adrian Underhill, who you'll hear from in a little while. Now, how do you do this? Well, I've suggested in a recent article ways that we might go about preparing people for the unpredictable. And I think Malu actually has a slide. I don't know if we can show it or not. Can we show it? Maybe we can't show it. Never mind. Anyway, this is there it is, Humanizing Language Teaching. And it's an article called Learning to Teach and Teaching to Learn. because I think we have to learn our students and learn the way they learn before we can even start to teach them. So never forget, that your experience is valid. It's something important. Only you have had those experiences. There was a man called Viktor Frankl who wrote a wonderful book, who said he had been in a concentration camp during the Second World War, and he'd experienced all sorts of terrible experiences. But he said, never forget what you experience, no power on earth can take away from you. You are the one who can make something of that experience. So don't forget that we all have, a unique sets of experience, ways of using them, and those can be really valid, particularly when we exchange them with other people. So I'll leave the floor to the other people now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Alan. That was really very interesting, and I just written down some notes. I hope the participants are doing the same as well as we are listening to our panelists, that you can write down some notes and share this at the end. We'll have time for your questions and reflections as well. We'll move to the next speaker, Cressa. And Cressa, your chapter in the book is entitled The Art of Growing. And from what Alan has said, the idea that lived experiences shape our identity as teacher. So I think you will have a lot to tell us about this. Before I give the floor to you, I'm going to give a very short introduction. Cressa is an English teacher in a state primary school in Greece. She holds a BA in English language and literature with a minor in Greek studies from the University of Athens. She also has a joint MA in comparative education and human rights from the University of London, Institute of Education, and the University of Athens. She's interested in art, visuals, thinking, and creativity in ELT and learning. Cressa, can you share us your thoughts from your chapter?
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy. I'm extremely happy to be, both to have been invited to contribute to this insightful publication by Alan, and as well as having been invited to be here today with you and share my experience as a practicing school teacher. In my chapter, I explore this experience, which is ongoing, by looking back at my past as a language learner and teacher, to reflect on and explain my current practice, especially with my upper primary students. A practice which is characterized by 5 major ideas. And the first idea has to do with the role of artful input, of art, of visual media, of photography and paintings in language teaching and learning as an independent emotional experience that can engage students in making their own meaning and can pave the ground for them to develop their own discourse in class, which can give them a sense of ownership of the language. The second idea has to do with aesthetic experience, which is associated with how through this artful input, learning can become more memorable and long-lasting. The third idea is about creativity, about promoting activities that can motivate students, that can trigger their curiosity, they can encourage them to pose questions, to take risks with language, and generally that cater for a multitude of ideas to be shared in class beyond the standard right or wrong answers. The fourth idea is how we can encourage their multimodal expression and visual literacy alongside, the traditional skills of reading, writing, listening and speaking, how we can promote 2 more skills which are growingly important in an increasingly image saturated world. And these skills are viewing and visually representing. Now, these 4 ideas, art, aesthetic experience, creativity, and visual literacy, are all bound together by the 5th and overarching idea, which is content into which this input, materials, skills, and tasks are integrated. And by content, I mean opening a window in our classroom and letting some of the real world come in. A world which may at times be problematic, but also a world in which our students are a part of, and they will grow up and become hopefully active citizens and maybe have a say in changing some of its wrongdoings. So I strive for topics that can bring forward values, they can raise empathy and awareness. Topics like discrimination, human rights, racism, poverty, topics which are hardly ever dealt with in course book materials, but which are compelling. They matter to students, and they resonate with their cognitive, their emotional and social growth. Pulling together the story of my personal and professional development so far, it has had to do with things like my experience from teaching in extent with diverse student cohorts ranging from very young to very old learners, and in less or more difficult situations, to each of which I had to adapt and attend to my students' needs, and within each of which I gained some new insight into my profession. A second important thing is that within our state curriculum for foreign language teaching, the teacher is allocated a certain degree of autonomy and decision-making. And particularly for the state school sector where I work in, the curriculum is not exam-driven. I find that this autonomy and decision-making can be very empowering for us teachers and can help us build our self-confidence. Also, I have benefited by extensive project work, which has honed my material design skills and has given me a longer term perspective on teaching and learning. And of course, a mind-blowing literary experience for me was when I started sharing my work online with a global ELT context, and initially through blogging, then through writing and speaking, because I believe that these are very powerful forms of self-development, since they ask for our reflection. They ask for reflection on the part of the teacher, and this can move us forward. Last but not least, as Alan said, it's all about the people that I met at various stages in this career. People who supported me, people who helped me, who I learned with and from, who actually I have come now to call friends and mentors, and who have inspired me to move forward. Up to you, Amira.
Thank you, Cressa. A lot of interesting thoughts that you have shared with us. And you talked especially about the idea of teacher autonomy and agency. And I'm wondering, in some contexts where teachers do not enjoy the same level of autonomy or agency, or they are not included in decision making, how can they be materials designers for their classrooms? How can they adapt the materials to fit the context in which they work in? You also talked in your chapter about the importance of teachers being writers, sharing what they are doing. And this is an idea I would like us to visit when we come to the Q&A part of the panel today. Thank you, Cressa. And moving to Harry to talk about an African context and to talk about the journey from little steps to giant, I guess. Let me get the title correct. It's From Little Steps to Giant Strides. This is the title of your chapter, Harry, in the book. And it's very interesting. You talk about your professional journey from Cameroon to becoming the leader of TESOL This is a very interesting story to share with us tonight to inspire our audience. Before giving you the floor, I'm going to give a very short bio. Harry is a lecturer in language education at the University of Leeds, UK. Previously, he worked as an English language teacher, teacher trainer, and policymaker in his home country, Cameroon, before moving to the UK in 2009. He has also been involved in a range of teacher education and materials development initiatives in Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and Europe. He's on the advisory board of Africa TESOL and is a great supporter that we are proud to have. The floor is yours, Harry.
Thank you very much, Amira. I hope my sound is okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right. Well, it's always a pleasure, you know that, Amira, to be on an Africa TESOL event and to share with colleagues on the continent, but also elsewhere in the global South. The story I capture in my chapter in the book edited by Alan, who, by the way, I should say thank you, Alan, for inviting me to contribute to this book and for being very patient with me. I was writing the chapter at a time when there were lots of things happening and extremely busy, but Alan gave me all his time and supported me in putting the story together. So I thought this is an opportunity for me to formally say thank you for your time and your patience and for inspiring me to put my story together in the way in which it is captured in this chapter. It's a story of an African teacher and a teacher educator whose personal and professional identities are rooted in very, very humble beginnings. Growing up in a village, having to trek long distances, 3 to 4 kilometers with my friends to go to school, and in my very early years, sometimes without shoes, and going to secondary school where I had to trek even longer distances to the lone secondary school in my village at that time. And then to university where I had to struggle for a place in a classroom in an amphitheater with thousands, and I mean 1,000 students in a classroom, and sometimes having to sit outside, try to find a place next to the loudspeaker outside the amphitheater at the University of Yaoundé. Those are the conditions under which I went to school. So we had to leave for a classroom that would start, a lecture that was going to start at about 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock. We would leave home at 5 a.m., rush to university to find space in the amphi, or at least if we were outside, to sit just below one of the loudspeakers. Now, things have changed now, and at the universities, there are more universities now, and they're a bit decongested. But in my years, there was only one university in Yaoundé, and that's where we were literally battling for a place in what we call the academic abattoir at that time. But coming through that and then training as a teacher, and finding myself in a part of the country where many colleagues from the South, like me, wouldn't want to work. In the far north of Cameroon was extremely difficult. But when I look back at all of that, it's become for me such a blessing that I was able to navigate education in these kinds of circumstances and to get to know and to survive this thanks to people. So my personal, professional and leadership development, I would say, is not built on books, it's built on people and the way in which my interaction with these people as human beings, not as teachers, not as teacher trainers, not as my bosses, but as human beings, has made me look at the ELT as a family. Now, a lot is being said about the ELT industry, and I feel lost when I hear the word the ELT industry, because for me, education is more like a family, and English language education is even a closer family to me, and I very often define my identity as an English language professional and a family member of that community. And this is because of those different people I met in the course of my life. So in the chapter, I have named representative. These are not all the people. I couldn't name all of them in the chapter, but I've named representative people, starting from my primary school career. Pa Wachong, who was my best ever teacher. Unfortunately, he died a couple of weeks ago, which is a sad thing. When I wrote my first ever publication, Scattered Thoughts and Emotions, it was a collection of poems that was funded by the Ministry of Culture in Cameroon at that time. I dedicated it to him, and I invited him to the book launch where my Minister of Basic Education was presiding. At that time, I was National Inspector, because I wanted my minister to see an example of a primary school teacher who was capable of shaping the person she called her National Pedagogic Inspector. Pa Wachong was the person who realized, to quote his words, that I was not good in figures, but I was excellent in words. And he bought me my first ever notebook and called me Jota Boy and encouraged me to write. So for me, language learning was not about learning grammar, vocabulary, or all of that. It was about picking up interesting expressions from people on the street. So I still remember learning something like, it depends on the mood. And I wanted to use it. I had someone say, it depends on the mood in which you are, if I called. And I wanted to use, it depends on the mood. And I used to say it even out of context to my friends, just to show them that I could use expressions that they didn't understand. But then what he encouraged me to do was to then go on and try to write. And I did write a lot. And my love for poetry actually came because of the support that Pa Wachong gave me and all the encouragement he gave me. My father, who was a head teacher in the same school Pa Wachong taught me, thought I was utter rubbish, and he was very quick with a whip at all times. But the person who saved me through primary was Pa Wachong. Now leaving then, and I moved to secondary school, and my French teacher, Prof. Mr. Ayok, was an outstanding person for me, not because he taught me the grammar and vocabulary and all the structures of French, but because he made me use French to express myself, to talk about the things that mattered to my life. And he would listen to me. He was more than he was never a teacher. He was a friend, he was a mate, he was a father, a big brother. That was who he was. And then to university, in all the difficulties of the university, there's one person, and everyone who's gone through the University of Yaoundé in the good old days, and even now would probably have heard about Professor Mbangwana Paul. We don't call him Professor Mbangwana Paul, we call him Pa Mbangwana. If you are in the university and you talk about Pa, we are talking, Pa means father, we are talking about him. And he was the person to whom we ran to when we were frustrated. I remember one of my university lecturers telling us straight, look, I can't mark 900 scripts over the time we have to mark them. So you need to work very hard, but pray very hard to be lucky, because when I take your scripts, I throw them in the air. Those that fall on the table will pass. Those that fall on the floor would fail. And they told us things like that bluntly in the 90s. But that was a reality. In my collection of poems, I wrote a poem entitled Ngwaikele, where I look at that academic abattoir where we were slaughtered on the tables of angry lecturers looking for our blood. And I say things like that because that's what university looked like. It wasn't the most pleasant of places in terms of academia, but it was one of the best places in terms of how the difficulties connected us as students. That is where I became part of a study group, a really solid study group, where together with my peers, we studied all the time. We called ourselves the Transcendentalist, I think the Cactus Transcendentalist Academics, because I was striving to go beyond what the teacher had told us in class and to investigate more and share knowledge. And these experiences from Pa Wachong through to Mr. Ayok, and then with my peers in the university, helped me begin to see how collaborative learning actually works, how being a human being rather than a professional in a business actually makes a difference in teaching and learning. And then I trained as a teacher and worked in the far north of Cameroon, which was very remote from my part of the country. And it took 2 days to travel to the far north. There were no phone lines. I remember ringing my father twice in 2 years. So to get on the phone, I had to go to the local post office, and then we had someone who would tap on the telephone line of some important minister, and we would use that for a few seconds to ring the South and speak to people. And even national radio was not accessible to us. So we were in a kind of a community that was cut off. Many of my students were leaving, left school, had abandoned school, and there were times when I actually literally had to go to their villages and beg them to come back to school, and then give them a pass mark even if they didn't deserve it, so that they could be in school. This was in a teacher training institution, people who were training to become primary school teachers. But it did train me a lot in terms of, and I remember my principal at that time, one of my students had an 8 on 20. That was actually his highest marks, and he abandoned school. He said he loved this teacher. This was the only teacher who connected with him. He did everything to learn English. He had failed everything, but he couldn't bear failing in English. That was the end of his life. And my principal told me, Harry, there are things you learn in school. There are things you don't learn in school. Go and sit in your house, think about it. Remember, he mentioned you when he was leaving. And I went back and brought him to school, and I gave him a pass mark. And my principal said, well, I knew you were going to think like that. Well done, you. But that were the formative years of my profession. And then I met these angels when I began to teach in a high school in the far north, Lycée de Maroua Domayo. It was the biggest high school in that town, the capital of the far north of Cameroon. And I had my smallest class was made up of 147 12-year-old children. That was my smallest class. And the largest one was premier, there was 16, 17 years, 332 or so in a classroom that was built to take about 80. And so I had students standing outside the door in temperatures of about 45 to 46 degrees Celsius, and some in class. But these are the students who changed my life completely and made me weave my experiences into my profession, because through them, I learned that just teaching them language wasn't enough. I needed to connect with them in a more professional, in a more intimate manner, to make them my friends and to learn from them. Now in Cameroon, we say the customer, there's a business community that says the customer is king. And I often hear teachers say, oh, these students are idiots. Now, you will never say that to your customer if you had a shop. Why do we say that to our students? Because in this business of teaching and learning, there is no better expert in learning than the student. And I learned this from my own student, asking them, what do you want me to do? How can I help you? Please help me to help you, because things are not working, as you can see. What are the things you want us to be doing? We don't have textbooks. Where should we find the resources then? What kinds of activities would make you engaged? And they helped me to develop those activities. And then I became, after working in this kind of context, I was appointed a national inspector straight from the classroom with no experience of having been a regional inspector or even a district inspector, no leadership experience. And then I landed in the ministry, and I remember my boss, Michael Nama, of blessed memory, whom I call as well Pa Nama, used to tell me when I went to him with an idea I had, he would say, well, you are an inspector. Stop thinking like a teacher. Why don't you instruct your collaborators to do that? And I'd never known that I could have collaborators. I was just a teacher and a friend to my students, someone who had grown professionally by learning from teachers, learning from my colleagues, and more especially from my students. How would I be giving instructions to other people? So my life in the ministry, they were difficult, but also exciting because of one person, Michael Nama, was all about going to teachers, looking at what they were doing, giving them a thumbs up, even when I knew sometimes they were not doing things exactly the way we wanted them to do them, but giving them a thumbs up and having them invite me back to observe them. So because they knew this person, empathized with them, this person was on their side, they were able to tell me things that my colleagues did not know. And then as an active member of the Cameroon English Language Teachers Association, I also learned to dismantle those hierarchical relationships that I had as a ministry official. So for example, I went to Cameroon with a colleague, Wendy Arnold, some years, I think in 2008. And the difference between my teachers who were members of the association and teachers who were not was very clear. So the teachers who came to me and said, oh, good morning, boss, good morning, sir, were people who were not part of the association. And those who called me Harry were definitely teachers who were part of that association. And that breaking that relationship between me and colleagues within a teacher organization helped me to understand colleagues more and to also be part of that community and to share in a way that was non-threatening and non-hierarchical. And that is my view of leadership. Leadership for me is sharing and serving. And I always say this as a joke, but that's true. And people who've been to ITFL conferences have probably seen that. I'm very good at carrying things and washing up and falling over, but not breaking things. So, and I do that everywhere because I want to be engaged. I want to be involved. Because for me, being a leader is about serving. It's not about dictating to people or telling them what to do. So for me, I'm not a pace setter, but I am good at executing. And because I grew up in a community where people shared their ideas with me, enabled me to grow, and they were very generous, my students and my colleagues, and they enabled me to grow professionally, to be capable of doing whatever I am capable of doing today. So I just, well, some books have influenced me now, looking back at my context. I've looked at the books like Holiday's book on context-appropriate methodology has shaped the way I've started looking at my life back. But
sorry, Harry, you went a little bit over time.
All right, okay. So one last sentence would be that my professional development and leadership development would be nothing if I had not encountered the people who made me who I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. And from what you have mentioned, you talked as well about the idea of the importance of networking and relationships with colleagues. And this is something that our next speaker has talked about in her chapter as well, Malou. She talked about the importance of lived experiences before formal training programs. Our next speaker is Malou. She has been a teacher and teacher trainer in Brazil since 1993. She has also been an active member of a group of teachers dedicated to increasing the amount of creativity found in language classrooms throughout the world. She has been the coordinator of the C group for 2 years, and she has presented in many countries, including England, Scotland, France, Greece, UAE, Indonesia, Japan, Brazil, as well as many online conferences. Malou, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amira. And I have to say, it's such a pleasure to be here among so many people I admire and share a little bit of my journey in ELT. Well, first of all, I have to say I'm deeply grateful to Alan, who is here, for inviting me to be part of this book, and to Africa TESOL for inviting me to be here with you today. Well, as you said, the title of my chapter is Finding My Own Way. And why did I choose this title? Well, I've been teaching English now for nearly 27 years, in spite of not planning to be a teacher in the first place. It just happened. And for the first decade or so of my career, I had no formal training in ELT, despite my academic background in languages. The training in ELT only came later, and by then, I had accumulated a personal theory of teaching and learning that I could match against the training I underwent. I believe that training is undoubtedly important and necessary, but as stated by Ellen and so many of the contributors to the chapters, teachers build their personal theories of teaching and learning through a continuing process of reflection on their lived experiences. They adapt the training they have received to fit their reality. This process, I believe, it's what makes them grow personally and professionally. And this has certainly been the way for me. This has been my reality. So how did I develop this personal theory of teaching? This is exactly what we are asked to do in the chapter, yes, which were my early experiences of language learning and education, the places that I've worked and that I've been to, and people that have influenced me. I feel that each time I go somewhere, that I meet new people, that I face new challenges, I embrace new ideas. And I truly believe this is essential for personal and professional development. But also important books that I have read and critical incidents that I have faced in my career have had an impact on me and have helped me develop this personal theory of teaching. There have also been major themes that have paved my journey and have shaped who I am today, both as a person and as a teacher. Well, the first of them is obviously creativity. Creativity has always been present in my life. My first English teachers, when I was only 2 years old, they encouraged creativity in the classrooms through play, through music, through arts. And since then, since I've become a teacher myself, it's been a major interest in my classroom. Literature, the second theme, which includes storytelling, music, art, and drama. The contact with literature in my own language, that is Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese especially, has made me realize that when I was studying literature and arts in English, I could make interesting and thought-provoking comparisons and thus helping enhance language education. Creative writing, another theme. Writing stories and poems has always been a central part of my life. When I was a little girl, I used to make stories. I used to make up stories in my grandmother's garden. And it was then later encouraged by my parents and by my teachers. Nowadays, I use them in the classrooms, and I encourage my students to do that too. Reading. Not only do students benefit from reading, but I believe that teachers also do. I think that teachers should read widely beyond professional literature, which will bring more vibrancy to the classroom and more discussion about any topic and not only language teaching and learning. And finally, global issues. Well, growing up and living in a country such as Brazil with a diverse population of people from all over the world with different backgrounds, races, religions, and cultures, I am exposed to global issues on a daily basis, and I always bring them into the classroom. From my point of view, teachers, they have the responsibility not only to teach the language, but also make students understand how their discussions and their actions affect others globally. I would like to conclude by saying that we as teachers are highly influenced by our beliefs, which in turn are closely linked to our values, to our views of the world, and to our understanding of our place within it. Many of my beliefs about language teaching and learning were formed when I was a student, even before I became a teacher, dreaming of becoming a teacher. My own teachers, they have a tremendous impact on my personal and professional life. So I do believe that the fundamental premise of being a language teacher is not only to teach a language, but also to add value to the teaching of each student in our classroom. The teachers' lives, they become examples and inspirations for others to follow. We as teachers, we are the models of our students' futures, and we help make them leaders in their communities, in their personal and professional lives. So that's why I think it's so important to empower teachers through making them aware of the ways that they can develop their own theory of teaching, their own sense of plausibility, and develop a resistance to the dulling effects of conformity of education in our time. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Malu. Again, very interesting thoughts, and I see the chat box. Our participants are interacting and sharing their thoughts relating to what you have been presenting so far. Our next speaker is Adrian. And from his chapter, I will quote what he said, that to bring about the change, one had to work with the context, not with the problem. And I think this is a key issue when we are talking about personal and professional development for teachers. I think it's very important when we are reflecting on the teacher's sense of usability to talk about context as well. And Adrian may give us some highlights here. Adrian started teaching in 1972. Later, he trained at International House and moved to Hastings, became the director of International Teacher Training Institute. From 1992 to 2003, he was vice president and then president of IATEFL. Since 1999, Adrian has worked internationally as an independent ELT consultant, focusing on teacher training, professional and organizational development, and school leadership. He has a jazz band and has played since his teenage years. A lot of interesting things to share about Adrian, but I will leave the floor for him to speak about his experience.
Thank you, Amira, for your introduction. And it's a great pleasure to be speaking to Africa TESOL. Hello, Africa TESOL. I can't see you, but I feel you digitally. And hello to, thank you, panelists. And thank you also to Alan for being the cause of all this through the book, which incidentally I have here, and I'm going to show you. There it is. See, that's the one. I'm lucky enough to have a hard copy, but you can get it digitally. Now, I've only got a few minutes. I'm not going to say anything about the stories and experiences, though I've much enjoyed what the panelists have said so far. I'm just going to talk about two conclusions, really, that I've come to so far, and they may change. I started out looking for the best way, and then I found really after a while that there isn't a best way, and I would have to keep looking. Sure, some ways were better and needed some fine tuning, and people and places and experiences taught me so much that is good, but I learned that you never get there. There isn't any arriving. Now that's lucky, that's a stroke of luck, although it's not what I expected when I started out, because as it turns out, that helps to keep me learning and keep me inquiring. I'm sure you all share this experience. So that my my expertise is always up for grabs. It's up for improving. It's changing and it's questioning. It's never complete. It's a constant inquiry and sort of like evolution. You know, everything's on the move. And this is good, because otherwise I would descend, and it has happened to me many times, that I would descend into a kind of static knowledge, a kind of duller approach, a kind of ritual, sort of routine teaching, no longer fresh, and my inquiry disappears, and my students' learning disappears as well. And the picture I often have is a bicycle, and as long as the bicycle is moving, it can stay upright. Unlikely that seems when you've only got two wheels, but through the movement, it stays okay. And that is the kind of like the learning. And as soon as the learning kind of stops for me, then everything descends into something entirely different. And I think this is really important for two reasons. One is that it teaches me what you already know, which is that knowledge is a process and it's not static, and that there isn't any arriving. But the second thing that it teaches me is kind of the really important thing, which is that I gradually realized that people learn most from teachers who are themselves learning. And, we love to have friends that are learning and parents that are learning, because that brings us to life and it triggers us. But I think we love to be learning. I think it's a natural human thing to be learning. It doesn't always happen when we want, and sadly it doesn't always happen in school and so on. We all know that. But the outcome of that is that I need to be learning alongside my students, and how can I arrange that I am learning alongside my students? Caleb Gatenio, who was a kind of a mentor for me, he said, you know, if you want learning, show learning. And not before and after the lesson, but in the lesson. And that, you know, that wasn't quite what my training sort of prepared me for. But when I and my colleagues are, you know, teaching as learning, or even living as learning, or working as an inquirer, working together, then I experience, as I know you do, this sense of a learning community, a learning school, a learning team. And in this sense, I think, you know, that learning teaching is a kind of social action in itself. So that, you know, we teach not by being certain, but by learning our way into the situation, by being on the same side of the learning fence as our students, and taking the students with us. And in a sense, I'm learning the students, and the students are learning the language. So we're both on the same side of the learning fence. And since I'm trying to learn them, things are always up for grabs, unpredictable, and requiring spontaneity and improvisation. And then I began to learn the same is true for the new forms of leadership. You know, not the forms that we see, sadly, still throughout the world and media and in public life, but the new forms that are starting in all sorts of places, teachers' associations, and Harry referred to this already. You know, the new leadership where we lead by, not by being certain, but by learning our way into the situation and learning our way through the situation and taking others with us, using all ways of knowing, you know, embodied knowledge, imagination, intuition, creativity, feelings, as well as the logical and cognitive. And, you know, what I find and realize, and I know this is the same for you, but I want to voice it anyway, is that learning my way into a situation, whether it's in class or outside, kind of alters the situation itself. If we together are learning our way into it, somehow the thing we're trying to deal with, the situation, is already somehow altered. And you know, I think this analogy goes further with leadership, because the old style leadership for the last few thousand years, a kind of male, hierarchical, somewhat militaristic leadership. The game was to prevent others from leading. That's what the leader did. But the new leader kind of helps others to lead. And in fact, spends time drawing leadership out of others through coaching and so on and so on. Just as new teachers spend their time drawing learning out of their students rather than trying to stuff it in. So really, that's what I want to say. You know, I do feel that, and my experience is that learning is a social action, that teaching is a social action, that learning is kind of evolution at work. And that, you know, when we touch that impulse of learning, which is so strong in people, though the flame does flicker, as we know, something very magical happens. And I suppose I call it inquiry. And I guess that's probably what you call it too. And if I have any expertise at all, it's based on never quite getting there. Yeah, thank you. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. And talking about learning in progress, I will move to Claudia, because she talked about gut feeling approach to teaching, and talking about a lot of interesting thoughts, from which the idea of varieties, local varieties, since we are talking about context in relation to teaching and experiences. So Claudia is going to share with us some thoughts about that. Before this, I'm going to introduce Claudia Firaraz. She is based in Argentina, where she graduated as a teacher of English and has taught language and literature for many years. She holds an MA in Education and Professional Development from the University of East Anglia and PhD in English Studies. She teaches on the MA program in Literatures in English in Mendoza, Argentina. Claudia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amira. Can you hear me all right? Okay, I'd like to start, of course, by thanking Africa TESOL for this fabulous opportunity to be in this panel, and Alan for his patience and dedication to the volume which I'm honored to be a contributor to. So yes, Amira, you're right. My chapter is called Dressed in Borrowed Robes, a Shakespearean reference to the clothes that don't quite fit. And the subtitle is Telling Our Stories in a Foreign Language, which I think very often feels like wearing borrowed clothes, borrowed robes. And to be consistent with the chapter, you know, the ideology of the chapter, I told stories in that chapter. And today I would like to run you through one of them. And I wonder how many people in the panel and in the audience know what this is. We call it a mate. And, you know, in English, you write a stress on the final E so that we don't pronounce it mate, but it's a mate. And people like Malu from Brazil, people in the audience from my own country, Argentina, or Uruguay especially, or Paraguay, will of course know what this is. It's almost the national drink. And you may be wondering why I'm talking about mate here. Well, just bear with me. I was attending a master's degree class in England, and I thought I was already a teacher of English who could teach a lot of things to her students. A teacher who actually taught Shakespeare at teacher training college, imagine. So proud of myself, I was sitting there one cold January in England, first class, surrounded by other students from other parts of the world, but most of the students in that class came from South America. And so they were passing around this thing, this mate, filling it with herbs that look like tea, and with a thermos flask that they carried with them. They filled it with hot water, not boiling, but hot water, 80 degrees really, and then they pass it around. The person who pours the drink into this gourd is the one who tries it out first by sucking on this that we call bombilla or bombilla, depending on what part of the area you come from, you pronounce it differently. And it's got a filter at the end so that the herb will not go through, and a spout at the end on this end so that you don't burn your lips. The cebador, the one who's pouring, will try it out first. And you may be saying, how rude. A person who's sharing a drink trying it out him or herself first. But that's because the first mate is very bitter. So you tried yourself to make sure that you get the worst part of it. And then, yes, the second one will go to the person sitting next to you. And you know what? You pass it round and you suck out of the same bombilla, the same straw. Can you imagine this in the days of coronavirus? When we are told to wear a mask, a face mask, not to breathe close to our friends if we're, you know, closer than 2 meters away, and passing around the mate. I would really like to see how many of my friends in this part of the world I'm in are writing about the crisis in our culture connected with not being able to share the same gourd and the same spout. We are now taking our own mate around. And you say, Claudia, what's the relevance of this? Well, I learned the relevance of all this on that first day in my master's course. One of my mates was from Saudi Arabia, and she couldn't make sense of what was going on among the South Americans passing around the mate. As I don't like mate, I never drink it. So I was queuing at the coffee machine to get some coffee. And so this lady politely came up to me and said, Claudia, how did you manage not to get addicted to that drug that your friends are passing around? And I said, no, it's not a drug or anything like that, though it can get addictive, yes. And I tried to explain, in English of course, what the mate was, why we drink it the way we drink it, and the importance of passing it around and sharing. And you know what? I was as inarticulate as any of my pre-intermediate students. I couldn't find the words. And this was because I was never in the position to talk about myself, my culture, my reasons for rejecting a mate and explaining why it's rude to reject it. No, because I'd always been speaking English, training teachers to teach English in my own context, where we are all Spanish speakers, where we all know what a mate is. Suddenly, globalization was thrown in my face. I was told, hey, Claudia, you need your English to communicate with the world, not only with people in your classroom. And that day, I decided I was going to rethink the content of my teaching practice, what I told my stories for, who I told them to. And wouldn't it be fabulous if through this medium of Zoom, in the midst of a pandemia, we all learned what our mate experience is in all our cultures? All the cultures of the panelists, all the cultures of the people in the audience. What's your mate experience? Because whenever I start a teacher training course now, I ask all Argentinians, all Uruguayans, all Paraguayans, all Southern Brazilians, tell me how you make your mate. And you know what? They can't find the words. And then they struggle with English and they tell their experiences. And they quarrel because we all do it differently. It depends on the family background. It depends on the region you come from. It depends on the kind of herbs you put in, etc. But then we end up comparing that, for example, to the sharing of the cola nut in some African countries. And I know so little about that. You know how I learned it? By reading post-colonial literature from Africa in English, because I don't speak the languages of Africa. And I use English to get to know you people, just as you probably use English to get to know me and my context. So that is my challenge throughout teaching. What is your mate experience? What is your sharing experience, as Adrian and the other colleagues on the panel have said? Sharing, such a key word in teaching, learning from other people's mate experiences, sharing my flow experience, which is my mate, when I say, no, I'm afraid I don't like mate, and my friends understand, and they say, shall I give you a cup of coffee or a cup of tea? What would you like? That is what matters. The person in front of you, the person who says, I don't know what mate is, or I don't like mate, how are you going to do something to be sharing with that person? That is, for me, the learning experience of teaching. Learning about the person in front of you, what that person can do for you and what you can do for that other person. So that mate experience with my Saudi Arabian colleague opened up the world of intercultural awareness in teaching and learning for me. And it was the very same year that Michael Byram started publishing his groundbreaking books on intercultural awareness, 4 years before the writing of the Common European Framework. And since then, my teaching has never been the same, and I hope it never will, because I need to keep on riding the bicycle. So thank you, Adrian, for the metaphor, and thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you all have your own mate experience. Thank you.
Well, thank you, you great speakers. We have listened to you. You have been all wonderful, and we've learned many things from you. And we have some important questions here from our Facebooks as well as from our chat box. The first question is addressed to Alan. And Alan, one of our listeners would like to know the essential quality for an educational leader. As an educational leader or educational mentor, what should be one's important quality? This question is addressed to Alan. Thank you.
Okay. Can I answer? Should I answer now? Okay. I can't see myself, but never mind. It's okay. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's a very big question, isn't it? It's a $64,000 question, really. I think just going back to what Claudia was saying, is, you don't never forget who it is that you are addressing. Who is this other person or who are these other persons that you are dealing with? You know, who are they? And be interested in that. You know, don't assume that what you have to say is going to be interesting. The way that you're going to lead is going to be followed because you're probably wrong. And to do this, you need the quality of what I would call mindful listening and observation. You know, paying attention to things, not making assumptions, going with an open mind. An open mind doesn't mean, you know, nothing in it. It means it's open to all sorts of things. Doesn't mean you don't have your own beliefs. I think the other thing is, you know, constantly to be thinking, what is it that I'm actually doing? What am I trying to do here? And am I actually doing it? You know, getting feedback and acting on feedback. I think that's very important. You know, reflecting. We haven't heard much about reflection, but you know, reflection, self-reflection, reflecting on what we're actually doing, I think is a key component, both for any teacher, but also for any learner. So those are some of the things that I would say. The other thing, of course, is, you know, if you're a teacher, is that what you're doing has to be interesting, and not just interesting, it has to be compelling. What Krashen calls compelling. So it may be that the texts that you use are compelling. It may be that the activities that you use are compelling. But in order to do that, you yourself have got to be compelled. You've got to feel, you know, that there is something really interesting going on here. Let's get in with it. Those are some of the things I would say. Is that enough? There wasn't more.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Alan. Now, the second question is addressed to Claudia, who has developed a very original experience she had in her professional life, and she uses the metaphor of mate. And someone would like to know what is your mate in your country?
My mate, as I told you, I don't drink mate because I don't enjoy it. I don't like it. And my father drank mate all the time. If you're actually talking about the real mate, that's what it is. Mine is empty. It's always been. I use this as an ornament, really. That's why I couldn't show you more than that. But my mate in my teaching profession is listening carefully to see what is going on in the classroom. And I tell in the chapter one story when the mate was passed on to me, metaphorically, by my first class of adults, medical doctors in an intensive care unit. You can imagine the tension these doctors went through. And they came to my class in the middle of their working day because the hospital had decided that lunchtime was a good time for them to learn English, imagine. So they were not having lunch properly, they had no time to relax, and they had to learn medical English with this teacher who knew very little about teaching. And one day, one of the students, sorry, see, this was really a Freudian slip. He taught me so much. Mario, I still remember, and this was ages ago. Mario, who was the head of the unit, rushed into the room and said, "Hey, Ita is dead." And I thought, oh my God, how unethical. Is he just, you know, coming into the classroom to say that one of the patients is dead? They'd never ever been unethical about their job. They'd never ever spoken about patients in my presence. No. Ita was a character in a soap opera that my granny was watching at the time. And she happened to be ill in the soap opera. The illness had been a central part of the soap opera drama, and she had finally died. And they had all been watching this soap opera, I found out, during their duty as a way of relaxing. So suddenly they could speak about what they knew, about how to look after a patient, whether the script writers were telling the truth or not, because this was not a real patient. They were telling me, hey teacher, stop bringing me so many texts on medical English, bring me something fictional where I can speak more openly about medical English. And since then, we spent our time reading stories about events that have to do with doctors, with the hospitals. The soap opera was part of our own world in the classroom. And I taught myself that they had passed the mate to me and I had to take it. And I had to say, I thought your expectations were, prepare me for a medical English exam or for a conference. And yes, those were their expectations. But how to get there could be more creative than trudging through medical manuals and papers. So that's my mate in my teaching. Hope that answers the question.
Great. Thank you for answering. And Krista, Malu, Alan, Adrian, and Harry, you all developed your experiences and belief that shape your professional life. And one of our attendees would like to know how you can adapt all this to students' expectations. The question is addressed first to Harry. Am I clear?
Sorry, I just forgot to unmute myself. Yes, I think, right. I talked about my story and I did mention my students, but I guess the question requires us to come back to that. And one of the things that came up earlier when I think I think on the slide Malu showed when Anan was talking is this humanistic aspect of language education. And from my own experience, the key thing for me is when one of the things I hear, my wife tells me, reminds me all the time, says, why do you call your students children? Even with my university students, I come back and I receive an email from my student from China, and it's really infuriating email at the surface level. But I know they are such lovely people. That's not what they don't intend to make me angry. I think they're just expressing themselves in a way that's different from the way I express myself. And I go, oh, these children, they can make you get angry even before you realize that they were not being offensive. And she goes, why do you call your students children? But that's something I learned from being a high school teacher in the north of Cameroon. Seeing my students more like children, I think helped me to develop a far more bigger sense of responsibility for their success and some form of accountability as well, and responsibility even for their failures that I would not if I were just seeing them as students. So for me, dismantling that business relationship with students and incorporating a bit of the human component and seeing them as human beings, as people who also have their challenges and the things that excite them, and digging into all of these to support their language learning is important. So the things we learn as human beings, the people who inspire us as human beings, have something beyond just being the teacher. So when I have trained teachers, I've always asked them, talk to me. I want you in the first 5 minutes to talk to me about your best teacher ever. And consistently, when teachers talk about their best teacher, it is never in terms of how they taught them grammar or vocabulary or reading comprehension or composition writing. It is about how they inspired them. It is about something other than teaching that they did and that connected us to them as human beings and made us follow them as teachers. So I think that's something to always remember, that the best teachers are not necessarily those that have all the technical competence, but they are often those who can blend, who understand students as human beings and bring that together. And in my own research with young learners, for example, I have found that for young learners, primary level children, effective and affective are almost synonymous. So the teacher they love is that teacher they like. And if they don't like a teacher, no matter how skilled you are with the technical knowledge, no matter how heavy your professional toolkit is, they will disconnect. So for me, bringing this into our teaching means being humans above being teachers.
Yes, so.
Flavian, you are muted.
Question is addressed to Malu. Yes, so you also talk about your experiences here today. These experiences shaped your professional life, and our attendees would like to know how you now adapt all these experiences to your student expectations. You have a floor.
Okay, so the first thing that I have in mind when I'm teaching is that I'm not teaching English, I'm not teaching global issues, I'm teaching people. Yeah, so the first thing that I when I enter a new classroom is who are there? Who are the people who are there? Who are these students? What are they interested in? What do they care about? And so I believe this is very important. Of course, me as a teacher, and I think all the others, we have a strict syllabus to follow, but I also allow space for them to choose what they want to bring into the classroom too, and make them interested in what they are learning. Yes, and so for example, some years ago, I was teaching a group of pre-teenagers for preparing them for an international English language test. Of course, in these classes, we have to follow the strict syllabus. I felt that it was not working. They were not interested in that, apart from being there, being prepared for this exam. So I asked them, what would you like to learn? Yeah, so that many of my teachers never asked me, what would I like to learn? And they didn't bring anything into the classroom. And so, okay, so how about I raised the topic of bringing how poverty affects migration choice, yeah, so global issues. They were not interested. And so again, I remembered, yes, then from my experiences of reading, as I said, literature in my own language, the background of my country. And then I said, okay, so let's do a project together. I asked them to research how the ancestors, it means people who migrated to Brazil some years ago, what were their experiences? Why did they move to Brazil? Yes. And I did the project together with them. I sat and I did the project to show, look, I'm learning with and from you. Yes. And they were very interested in everything. To my surprise, by the end of the course, their score that was better than the other courses that I followed just a strict syllabus. And so I realized that I could bring my background into making them involved into the learning process. First of all, bringing something that they are interested in and that they care about, and something that I believe, and then to show that I am a lifelong learner just as them, by sitting and doing the project together with them and presenting the results too. And so I think that is just one of the examples of how I bring my background into the classroom, how I adapt everything that I learn into the classroom.
Thank you. Now the floor is to Adrian. How you adapt your experience or experiences to your student expectations?
Thank you. Picking up on what Malu has said and Harry before her, Harry was highlighting these memorable qualities of teachers. And it's interesting to note that these qualities of teachers, which are so important, are not the focus of teacher training courses. Somehow teachers have to go out shopping for themselves to develop these qualities, and they learn other qualities which may well be very important. And yet the ones we remember are outside, in my view at any rate, you may disagree, outside the curriculum of teacher training. I remember very few quotes from movies, but one that I do remember is Paul Newman in the film Colour of Money. And in that film, he is a teacher of pool. He's teaching a student to play pool for money, for big money. And he's the character of Eddie Felsen. And this character, Paul Newman, says how important it is. He said he described himself as a student of human moves. That's the quote. I'm a student of human moves. And I think that's really cool, because that is it. I, the teacher, am a student. I wish to be a student of human moves, to see what it is that moves. And which is a long way around of getting to the question, which is that I think part of the answer, at least my bit of the answer, is really to start where the students are and not where I am. And I've spent lots of years starting where I am as a teacher, and kind of like throwing stuff over the wall, hoping it lands in the bucket. And gradually discovering that actually I have to cross the bridge myself over to the other side where the students are, and to work from where they are. And it's quite a, it seems obvious, it's easy to say, but for me it was, you know, quite a revelation, and still remains a revelation, to cross the bridge and not just chuck stuff over the wall. Anyway, yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Adrian. Now I'm to Krisa. Krisa, when we citing those teachers' important qualities, we hardly see that part of experience. People like a teacher to have an academic background, a human dimension, and a methodological dimension. There is no such an experience in those teachers' qualities. Why such a thing?
Evan, I could not hear you very well. Can you please repeat it?
Yes, when we're talking of teachers' important qualities, okay, most of the time we talk of academic dimension, human dimension, and what we call methodological dimensions. There is no such things called experience. What do you think?
I think experience is there, even though maybe it's not acknowledged officially as such. I believe everyone knows that it's experience actually what keeps us moving, and how we progress and move on. I'm not sure that there is no such talk as experience, but maybe it's a kind of covert talk. Maybe it's some kind of hidden code meant for maybe teachers. It's common ground among teachers. I mean, as a teacher, I'm used to always talking about experience. Now, academics or policymakers may not allude to experience very much, and this probably could have to do with each one having another agenda of interests that needs to be pushed forward. Maybe Sometimes our interests are not on the same line, but I generally believe that among teachers, experience is highly valued. Flavian,
yes,
Flavian, you are muted.
Yes, I was another question of one of our attendees is, well, how do you develop reflective, critical thinking with your learners through experience? The question is addressed to Claudia. Thanks.
Critical thinking. Well, I think I've read some very interesting ideas in Chris's chapter, as a matter of fact. And you can, it depends on whether you're talking about primary learners, secondary learners. There will be a host of other techniques like making thinking visible and strategies like that. I think that it's also a matter of attitude. You know, if you bring a text into class, a story like the one I told you, you can take it as truth, or you can suddenly decide to look at it from very different perspectives. If I tell you a story from the point of view of a female in the story, how about retelling the story from the point of view of a male? Would that change the story? If the mother tells the story about her child, what if the child told the story? What if the dog told the story? Those changes in point of view are ways of developing critical thinking. The fact that we know that depending on what point of view you take, the story will be a different story. That's one among hundreds of different techniques we could suggest. And probably I could pass this on to my colleagues to see what they would suggest. I've read some very interesting ideas for visual literacy in Chris's chapter, for example, that have to do with critical thinking as well. But basically, I think it's a question of attitude from the point of view of the teacher to pass this on to the student, not to take things as given, but things that need to be reconsidered, rethought, and intervene whatever is given, a text that may be visual, can be a video, can be an image, it can be a story, as I was saying, and see what happens when you intervene it, when you change the point of view, when you ask the what if question. One I love to share with trainees is, what would have happened if Cinderella had not lost her shoe on the way out of the party? And the answer immediately is, among giggles, that we would have a different story. Of course, just daring to change the ending of a story, to make what if questions to life as well as to texts, is meaningful, and it develops, I think, a critical attitude. So that's from me now.
Thanks for the clarification. Now a question is addressed to Harry. Harry, in her presentation, right away insisted on humanistic values. And one of our attendees would like to know what the presenter think, okay, about those teachers who are afraid to be seen as humans in their professional life.
I think the problem, and I'm talking now with my African teacher educator hat on, comes from teacher education itself. Having worked as a national inspector and observed hundreds of teachers around the country, my country, I think there are amazing teachers out there doing fantastic work who are often not given the opportunity to share what they are doing with other colleagues, or who probably don't even know that the value of sharing that with colleagues. Our educational systems are still very heavily teacher dependent in many ways. They're still very knowledge based rather than skill and competence based, even though we might call our approaches, competency-based approaches. I'm looking back at my own country, for example. The exams have never changed from what they were when I was in primary and secondary school, yet we have had lots of pedagogic approaches that have changed, but the exams are all as traditional as they were in the traditional days. So there's some kind of, so we know the washback effect then is that whatever approach to pedagogy we adapt is going to come to nothing if the exams is still the same. Students are going to say, well, sorry, we don't want to be doing that. We just want to be getting ready for that exam, which has never changed. And that is the same with our teacher education as well. I can't say how many times I've listened to lectures about interactive language teaching. Now, how can people possibly learn about being interactive through a lecture? And that still happens in our teacher education. So that teachers then who go to the field with this pedagogic briefcase tend to have a lot of problems because they're going with a set of rules that were taught to them in training. And then before long, they realize that the field, the human beings they're dealing with from one classroom to the other are significantly different from one another, and they don't respond to the norms as cut out for them in the pedagogic handbag that they've carried to the field. Now, what makes the difference between a good teacher and a not too good teacher is how quick and how open they are to adapting their thoughts to the realities of the context and the people with whom they are working. And part of this, and I think a very important part, is sharing that responsibility with the students. Now, I am probably known a lot in the world of learner autonomy because of an article that I co-wrote with Richard Smith that was one of the most read in the journal for a long time. But when I was a teacher, I'd never heard anything about learner autonomy. I've heard people listen to me talk about my teaching and they say, oh, that sounds very much like DocMe. I don't know what DocMe is. And many teachers in Africa are doing fantastic work, which is then theorized into very complex language by academics and then retaught to teachers in their training in a systematic manner that detaches that from the natural instinct of responding to difficult circumstances. Michael West in the 60s said something about this experience of teaching in difficult circumstances, that the teacher in difficult circumstances, for that teacher, it's even more important to understand that teaching is not as important as learning. Because let's be honest, we can teach till thy kingdom come. If students don't want to learn, if they're not interested, learning will not take place. But learning can take place without teaching, if the students are willing to learn. So in this business of, like I said, in this business of learning and teaching, the learner is important and learning is important. And I think our role is to encourage, and that's been said by many other people, Jeremy Hammer, for example, and the whole idea of sociocultural theory we talk about is help students to become better learners rather than strive to be a better teacher. Because if our notion of being a better teacher is about teaching, then we might be actually, no matter how good our intentions are, our practice might actually be standing on the way of learning. So a better way is to see our job as managers, as a coach to a football team, helping players to develop their skill to the best of their abilities. And if teachers don't want to do that, then they're hanging on to that toolbox that they took out of the training college. But as we know now, that toolbox is just a toolbox. It only becomes valid if you can use it in a way that recognizes the differences between the human beings in your classroom.
Thank you, Harry. And thanks everyone. We have went 4 minutes beyond the ending time, but I think this is because we have had a lot of interesting questions to respond to. Thanks to all our panelists and to the participants as well. This has been a very interesting and enlightening panel discussion. And I'm sure we have a lot of ideas to reflect on after this session. Please feel free to post your comments and reflections on our Facebook page. The discussion is going there as well. Just to remind you at the very end that we have another panel discussion going on next Saturday, and it will be announced on our Africa TESOL Facebook page and website and social media channels. So join us next week for another panel discussion. Thanks everyone, thanks to our panelists. We are very grateful for your time and for the experiences that you have shared with us tonight. I'm sure our teachers and audience have taken a lot of ideas to reflect on from what you have shared tonight. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.